Only a month after the release of Halloween, John Carpenter unleashed another slasher with Someone's Watching Me, which is almost completely forgotten now. John Carpenter's movie run during the 1970s and 1980s yielded a shocking number of classics, including The Thing and Big Trouble in Little China. Of course, it was his tiny-budget slasher Halloween that made his career. Pretty much everyone involved with this 1978 chiller thought it as an exploitation chia pie, but Carpenter's masterful direction saw it become the template for the slasher genre. Carpenter had little interest in making a Halloween movie franchise, however, though he did produce the first 2 sequels, and wanted to move on from slashers. Carpenter went on to make classic ghost stories, The Fog, sci-fi, Escape from New York, The Thing, and even comedy, Memoirs of an Invisible Man, in his later work. While he never stepped behind the camera for a Halloween sequel, Carpenter did direct one final slasher, 1978's Someone's Watching Me. John Carpenter followed Halloween with the wildly underrated Someone's Watching Me. Carpenter was especially prolific as a screenwriter during the 1970s, and was pumping out screenplays in an effort to both pay the bills and land directing gigs. One such script was High Rise, a thriller in which a woman is stalked by a stranger who observes her in the high rise across from her building. While it didn't get any takers as a movie, NBC hired Carpenter to make it as a TV movie. Retitled Someone's Watching Me, Carpenter hired Lauren Hutton and Adrienne Barbeau as his lead actors and filmed the entire thing in 10 days. It was also Carpenter's first union gig, with his previous works being entirely independent affairs. What's significant about Someone's Watching Me is that it was shot before Carpenter moved into Halloween, and he had little involvement with its editing. The director stated on the making of featurette John Carpenter, Director Rising, that despite its TV movie limitations and the short time he had to make it, he's proud of the end result. Ironically enough, Someone's Watching Me would make its NBC debut only a month after Halloween. The movie was well received, but not only was it completely overshadowed by Carpenter's previous film, it quickly fell into obscurity after its original airing. Someone's Watching Me became a Halloween prototype. Speaking of his time making the film in John Carpenter, Director Rising, the Helmer admits that Someone's Watching Me was essentially a testing ground for Halloween. He learned key lessons on the project, such as pacing himself to make his days and working with a union crew. Even more importantly, Carpenter brought many of the same techniques he developed from the NBC film into Halloween. This includes the use of the Panaglide camera, or how certain shots track characters. A direct line can be drawn between how Someone's Watching Me and Halloween build up suspense too. They share certain beats like threatening phone calls or the leads being stalked by a largely faceless threat. Even the finales aren't that far apart, coming down to a desperate fight for survival between the final girl and their tormentor in a darkened home. On one hand, a big difference between Halloween and Someone's Watching Me is the violence involved. Being an NBC film, there's no foul language, blood, or spicy bedroom antics involved, and the body count is low. That said, Halloween isn't all that gory either, even if it is decidedly more R-rated in tone. Someone's Watching Me was hard to see for decades. Even amongst Carpenter completionists, Someone's Watching Me became a rare unicorn. It never got a VHS release in America, and it only arrived on DVD in 2007, almost 30 years after its debut. It got scant mention in interviews or features on Carpenter either, and was often relegated to a career footnote. Since it was a slasher film made for TV, there was likely an assumption Someone's Watching Me probably wasn't up to much. That's why it became a lost Carpenter film for a long time, and while it is held back by the various restrictions imposed by being a TV movie, it's a solid suspensor. Carpenter milks a lot of tension from a story largely told from one apartment set, and in Hutton and Barbeau, he has 2 capable female leads. Barbeau's Sophie being a lesbian is of particular note, as this was quite a rarity for 1970s network television. Someone's Watching Me is obviously much less potent than Halloween, but then again, so are most horror movies. It's still somewhat obscure compared to the rest of Carpenter's CV, but it's easier to find now than it ever has been. For fans of the director, it's required viewing.